Little trip for your driving and your road trips that you're going on this summer. So when we're seated in that position in the car for any long period of time, a lot of us tend to start getting soreness and pain, and we get stiffness through our hips and our low back. I'm sure you all have felt it. I know I just did last weekend on a trip I made. Now, what often happens, and many people don't realize this, is your psoas muscle, which runs from our hips, front of our hip, and attaches to our lumbar spine and our lower back. So it has an attachment point at both the hip and the back. What happens is when you're sitting down in that position driving, that muscle is shortening, it's under a lot of stress, and it can pull at both of those attachment points, both in the hip and the back. A lot of times it's a big part of what you're feeling when you get those aches and pains when you're on those long driving trips. So what we can do to help combat that while we're driving, when we can't stand up, obviously standing up would be one good solution. We can't do that when we're driving. So our psoas is a big time hip flexor. So when we're in the seated position, our hips are in what we call a flexed position. So that muscle is going to be shortening up and tensioning up the entire time we're driving. What it also does, and many people don't realize this, is it's an external rotator. So it turns our hips out. And a lot of us, when we drive, we get stuck with this leg up here on the dash, up by the door. This one's down on the pedal. We kind of turn our hips out and get in this lazy position. Well, when we have our hips turned out, in addition to being flexed, that psoas muscle we just talked about is under a heck of a lot of stress. So one thing we can do to take some of the stress off that muscle and help ease some of those aches and some of that stiffness we feel, we can rotate our hips in. So bring this foot down and turn both of our hips in and bring our knees inside of our feet for a little while. Obviously this foot's still on the gas, but you can still turn it into a certain extent. And when we turn our hips in, we take tension off of a lot of those fibers, some of those externally rotating fibers in that psoas muscle can help us go a long way. And as we do that, you also want to think about pushing your low back into the backrest to a certain extent. And that'll give you a little bit of hip extension as well to take some of the stress off some of those flexing fibers also. So it looks a little goofy, but when you do it, it can actually take a lot of tension off that muscle. It can help your hips and your back feel a lot better. You can take a few deep breaths as well and get some good rib expansion. It can help take some of the tension off also. Now, one other thing, taking a step farther, is a lot of people tend to favor their right hips. So when we do that, this foot's on the gas. Like I said, this one's up here. You have even more tension on that right side. And outside of our left hip, inside of our right hip can be under a lot of stress because of that, and you'll feel one side of your back more also. So to combat that, you can bring your left foot down off of the door and give yourself a little bit of a shift in your left hip. So think about pulling your left knee behind your right knee. So a little twist motion there. And you'll feel it inside your left thigh engage when you do that. And try to get your hips a little more centrated in that manner. And that'll help balance out that tension side to side. Also, if you start to feel tension on one side more than the other. Give that a shot in your next road trip. I guarantee you'll feel a lot better. And obviously, hit up some rest stops along the way so you can get up and move around. That's going to be the best solution.